Chapter 20, Section 2. Today we'll be talking about the criminal justice system. All right, so moving on, our main idea is going to be when an adult is arrested, he or she goes through a specific process. And this is when we use the rule of law and due process, all right? And let's get more specific about what happens inside of due process. And that meaning things like arraignment, indictment, sentencing, or acquittal, all right? So we'll be running through all these key terms in the upcoming slides. I think a lot of these you've already heard of and we've talked about in one fashion or another. So let's move through this steadily and get the job done for today. All right. Ms. Ringenberger?
All right, so
What you want, what you want, what you gonna do when sheriff's done?
an arrest. There needs to be probable cause. Please understand the concept of probable cause. Police officers have to have probable cause in order to do certain things, to arrest you, to, follow you, those kind of things. And probable cause means that an average, normal human being could look at the situation and say, yeah, it seems like they might have done that crime. And so that's probable cause. And then probable cause gives a police officer the ability to pull you over, to ask you questions, to go through your trunk. That used to be a big deal. I don't hear so much about it now, but yeah, so those kind of things. And then in order to do extra searches, they need to get a warrant. And a warrant is, as it says there, a legal document basically issued by the court giving permission for the arrest, the seizure, and the search. And so what all judges have now is they have technology so that the warrant can be filled out by the police officer. It is, I've ridden with a judge when they've gotten information that they needed to take care of a warrant. And because it's a private situation, she pulled over. I actually got out of the vehicle so that she could deal with the issue at hand. And then she signed the warrant and through technology, right, digitally signed it and then sent it back to the police officer so the police officer could do their work. So that's kind of what goes on there. So a warrant is a specific piece of information or permission from a judge, and it has to go through a judge. It can't just be like the chief of police for the police officer to take that next step.
And the police officer has to tell the judge what the good reason is.
Right, they have to list the probable cause.
There is a due process to a warrant.
It's not just quote like hearsay. I mean, there has to be something that allows the officer to tell the judge that this is specifically going on. And the judge is going to ask, how do you actually know? So it might be as simple as maybe going into a house, for example. There may be an undercover person that went in and maybe sold drugs, for example, that they've actually had a confirmation that we've actually been in there before. We've purchased drugs from them. It can't be just like walking around going by a house and saying, well, I think they're selling drugs in there. You're going to have some specifics about what actually would be in there that would be solid enough to be able for a judge to give a warrant.
So even remember that in section 1, I talked about the robbery break-in that happened at my house. Months later, as they're doing the investigation, and it was an iPad, I had to sign off on a warrant so that they could search the iPad, and that iPad that opened up and was used. And yeah, that's why this gentleman got such a long prison term, because all the evidence was on the iPad about drug deals. He, like I said, he had taken a gun and he was trading that gun for drugs. There was just a number of things on there that added to his incarceration. But all of that was found because of a warrant, and the warrant was gained through a due process.
Because of probable cause. Good. All right, so preliminary hearing. When you've been arrested and kept overnight, then you will go to the court And then the court will do the preliminary hearings. And so basically they're setting dates, they're assigning you a lawyer if you can't afford one on your own, bail is set, those kind of things. So it's just that initial process.
This is where you claim guilt or innocence?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet. The preliminary is like, they are just gathering the information, deciding if they're
Yeah, if they're
gonna let you out on
actually
bail.
charge you.
There's a variety of steps that take place, but
And a judge, as it says on there, may dismiss the case and just say, maybe the police officer brought the person, there wasn't a warrant, but the judge is gonna take a look at this and basically say, what you did as a police officer, it's not gonna be able to hold up in court, and just, you're free to go, and all the evidence. I mean, to be a police officer, as we had mentioned earlier, is very challenging. And one of the things that when you are a police officer, you need to understand what rights that, first of all, the police officer has, but most importantly, what rights we have as people. And you want to make sure that you're not violating those rights, because even if you arrest that person, this can be just dismissed.
and actually, Tom, you are right, because preliminary hearing means a variety of things. And so, yes, that could happen in the preliminary stage. It might not be in that very first, but in the preliminary stage, you're absolutely right, so.
I've watched so many Law and Orders over the years, that's where my question.
Well, one of the things you have to really understand, I bring this up too, is that when we watch courts on TV, they may not necessarily follow all of the procedures that a normal court would have to follow. They speed things up. And all of this stuff that you see on movies and on the television, it's made for entertainment. And they have like a half hour basically or an hour to show how this is done. So they bypass things, they speed things up, they change things around. So make sure again that you understand the rights that you have.
All right.
There you go, let's move on. All right, continuing with this, the grand jury process is used, right? And this grand jury, remember, is where there is an official, hey, we think there's enough evidence here to determine if somebody should be accused or not accused, somebody should be arrested or whatnot here. It's that time where their formal charges are set. And a grand jury is, in many cases, a group of citizens who are determining this.
I always think about, a grand jury, as it says, it does not decide the innocence or guilt of a person. It's a pre-trial to find out, do these people that are sitting on the grand jury believe that there's enough evidence? And the reason that is because of a thing called double jeopardy. If you bring a person to trial and the regular jury, the trial jury, then feels that, why was this even brought forth? And we don't really believe there's enough evidence, and you let this person go, it's kind of a check to make sure that there is enough evidence that this grand jury feels that by all means, the prosecution has enough evidence that there really needs to be a trial to be held. So it's a check on our system, and it's a very important check.
And I don't know, last summer I went, because court hearings are public, I just went to a couple days where there was court in Stevens County. And so arraignments don't always look like there's a jury. Sometimes people forego a jury and they're just dealing specifically with the prosecuting attorney, could be a city attorney, a county attorney, a state attorney, and the judge. So between their lawyer, the prosecutor or the prosecution, and the judge, they kind of finagle things and work without a jury. So sometimes they do that. I can't tell you I understood everything that I saw, but it's interesting. And if you ever wanted to do it, it's open to the public.
And you have the right to waive a jury trial and just have the judge listen to your case. I always advise the students, I wouldn't necessarily just to have one person, but I think, I'm not saying go out and commit crimes or anything like that, but I think you probably have a better chance to have a trial jury to see it innocent than versus just going against the judge. That's just my opinion. I don't know what you think on that, but.
Yeah, there's a saying that goes with it. I would have to double check it. That says something along the lines of, if you're guilty, you're better off in front of a jury.
Yeah.
Because you can place doubt more easily. So, I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm never in that situation.
I said, I don't want you going to commit crimes.
But there's a saying out there, and you can look it up, I'm sure it's somewhere. But anyway, we're good.
Right.
Your grand jury.
Now, pretrial motions, maybe there was a situation where evidence was collected, maybe your rights weren't upheld during the investigation, and you would make that motion, this evidence can't be used against me because there wasn't a warrant to collect it. All right, so, let's say an officer opens up a part of your car that you say specifically you cannot search, and that could be, argument for a pretrial motion. The officer searched an area, they did not have a warrant, nor did they have my permission, and so any evidence found in that place cannot be used against me. All right? Then there's plea bargaining, and many, many cases go through plea bargaining rather than an actual trial.
And plea bargaining is, again, you agree to plead guilty, but the reason that you're pleading guilty is because the sentence is going to be lower than what the actual sentence would be if you went to trial and were found guilty. So many times people probably know that they're going to be charged and be found guilty, and it's one of those where it's like, I'll plead guilty, but I'll do that to a lesser sentence. And the court does that because there's a lot of backup time. This, we said, is not a speedy process. It costs the taxpayers a lot of money. So people are looking at how can we speed this process up, and plea bargaining is a big idea that actually happens in the court of law.
So if you notice from this, we had pre-trial hearings, now we have grand jury, we have pre-trial motions. Every time you do one of these things, you're going back into court. And you're scheduling it, and the courts are busy, so sometimes you're scheduling 2 months out, 3 months out for each one of these things. So you can see where Mr. Howden said it took him about 16 to 18 months to get through that particular situation, how that could happen.
Let's move on. Now you're going to trial.
Jury selection. With the jury selection, citizens from an area are called to serve on a jury. Many times people in our community are set to call. There are a number of teachers I know this past year that they've sat on juries, and you end up going. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be picked, but this is our duty as a citizen to decide on the innocence or guilt. It's a check, again, on our legal system, that it's just not judges that are making the decisions about penalizing people for being accused of crime. The greatest thing about our society that we have in our legal system is us as peers that are going to be deciding the innocence of guilt of our fellow peers. And so that's why there's this idea, again, of coming to trial and selecting. It says jurors must decide then if the defendant, that's the person that's being accused of a crime, if they are innocent or guilty.
Have you ever been a juror?
No, I've been called into the pool. So what happens is your name, you get sent a letter, and you call in, and you become part of the jury pool, and then you are notified whether there is going to be a trial or there isn't going to be a trial. So I've been to the pool, but I've never been had to listen to a case.
Yeah, I've never done it.
I've actually sat on a jury. One of the interesting things when you do sit on a jury, and we've kind of made mention to this, but the lawyer on the defense team constantly brings up when you're looking to find the client guilty would be that there has to be, if there's any reasonable doubt, if you have any doubt in your mind that the crime may have not been committed by the accused, you need to come up with an innocence. And that gets struck home many, many times in a trial, and I know listening to other trials and stuff. So it's pretty hard sometimes when you're listening to all the evidence that the prosecution is presenting, and you're like, okay, that sounds really good, that sounds really good. But then the defense comes in and they poke holes in that and they try to produce doubt. And that doubt then sits in your mind, and then you start questioning whether or not that really took place. And it takes 12 individuals to come up with a guilty plea. And all of them have to agree in a trial that this person is guilty. So when you get done with the trial and you sit and actually will make the decision, then all of you then talk as a jury, and you end up making a decision about whether or not that person is innocent or guilty. It's very challenging. It's very stressful. It's something though that we need to do though. It's very, very important. So when you get older and have the opportunity to serve on a jury, it's the greatest thing that you can do to be a citizen in the sense of our society. So please do that.
And just know that it's, as interesting, because I find that the idea would be interesting. As interesting as it is, as Mr. Greenwald said, it's very challenging. My husband was on a jury for a child abuse case, and it took a week, and he couldn't sleep. It was a pretty horrific case. So there's some challenges that come with it, and
But think of society in the alternative. We didn't have a jury process. Would your justice be served? And it would be a much more difficult case. So, this is one of those costs to freedom that we have to pay.
we do.
All right. On to the trial, right? And this is where the defendant has the right to a speedy trial and a public trial. Defendants are also entitled to a lawyer, as we said in the last section. Absolutely. Now, remember, speedy, I think, has to go in air quotes these days, but, they make their best effort. People would quit committing crimes, cases would get a lot faster, okay? All right? This is where you're going to call your witnesses and evidence to either prove or disprove your case, and this is where the case will go to trial, to the jury for the decision, or to the judge if you're having a bench decision in the case.
And this is kind of a shout out to those individuals that work with our mock trial, have great exposure and stuff, how our legal system works. It's probably unfortunate that we're not able to go through. I know in my class we're going to go with a trial and do some things. More than likely we're not going to be able to do that this year because of, again, the COVID-19. But just you'll get the basics and stuff right here, and make sure again you're reading your assignments and doing your study guide sheets, and hopefully listening to us and give us a clear picture of what's going on. And by all means, again, email any of your questions that you might have on these trials. And if we don't have the answers, we can try to go get some information, from authority figures.
Right.
Absolutely. Now, sentencing. All right. I guess I do essay tests because I like sentencing so much. All right, the judge. This is where the judge hands down, the consequences of the crime, right? So, judges have some latitude. In some cases, there are laws that dictate, mandatory sentencing requirements. So if you do this, the minimum amount a person can serve is that. You know, so there are some guidelines, but then there are also some guidelines that judges, you know, can go, you know, way off the status quo. You hear of, at times, judges have sentenced criminals to college education because he felt, you know, going to college was A, cheaper than incarceration, and B, gave this person a shot at life. So you can have those kind of things that happen.
So the judge has some latitude then on the sentencing process, taking a look at the individual, seeing what they committed, and they could either quote, throw the book at them, that means give them the maximum, or basically give them the minimum sentence that one could possibly do for committing that crime.
There have been citizens here in Morris who have been sentenced to jail, and, you know, let's say they have to spend 90 days in jail, but they go to work, and they go back to the jail, and then they go, you know, sleep there and go back to work. And so there are those things, ankle bracelets, so house arrest, so you're sentenced and you have to stay within the proximity center of the ankle bracelet, that kind of thing. Other sentencing, let's say it's an alcohol case, your car may have to be fitted with a breathalyzer, so every time you want to start the car, you have to blow into the breathalyzer to start the engine. And if you blow better than 0.08, car won't start, and the police will be notified.
Yeah, there's, the word stayed, means like, I'm giving you, if I'm the judge, I'm giving you this portion of your sentence, but I'm staying it for a year. What that would mean is like, you don't have to do it. And then during this next year, you're going to be monitored. And if you follow all the rules that are set forth by the court, then we're going to not make you do that. But if you break the rules that we've laid out as a court for you, then we're going to come back and you have to do this penalty. So that's what the word stay means. Sometimes you'll see that in the newspaper, so much is stayed, and that's what that means. One of my jobs during college, someone that I worked with got picked up for DUI, and they were in Benson.
Why are you pointing at me when you say that?
Because you said the alcohol thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not because it was him.
That wasn't me.
No, someone I was working with at the time had been found guilty, pled guilty for DWI. And so they could get out during the day. You were talking about that. So I would drive their car down to Benson, pick them up in the morning, and bring them back to Morris so that they could work. And then at the end of their shift, I would drive them back to Benson, and I would come back with their car. So they paid me $10 a trip. And back at that time, that was a lot of money,
Yeah.
right? So I got $20 a day to go down, pick them up, come back, and then take them back and come home. So that was one of my college jobs.
Another term that comes up is probation, and probably you have heard of probation before. In regards to having an officer of the law check in with you, excuse me, making sure that, you know, you are again following the rules, not violating what the probation has been set up by the courts. You know, it's a way to keep people out of jail. It's in the sense of giving a person another second chance, so to speak, before the judge actually would send somebody to jail. A lot of times this is going to be used for juveniles, but it's not always used for juveniles. But, you know, we have had people obviously in our school, maybe not, I don't know, this year or in past years, that have been put on probation and stuff. You know, once you are on that, hopefully you learn your lesson, and that's the whole thing, I think, of our judicial system is to correct behavior. Unfortunately, people do make mistakes, and as a result, see those mistakes and then correct those and become a better human being because of it.
Right. And I used to do summer school, as you know, here for 14 years, and quite regularly, the courts would sentence a juvenile to summer school to, you know, get their credits for education. And I had very specific guidelines as to if this person isn't showing up, who to call. Typically, it was a social worker or a police officer, And then, miraculously, all of a sudden that student would show up within the next half hour and whatnot. And then I'd also have to fill out reports for the courts to let the courts know that this person's attendance was such for the last month, and this is the progress that they have made. Whether they have been making progress or not making progress was always or always requested by the judge and whatnot. So
Sorry.
no. Lots of different things are what judges can do for people.
And I just want to, because sometimes people get this mixed up, I'm not going to go into any long story, but probation and parole are different. Probation is sentenced on the front, so to keep you out of jail. Parole is assigned afterward, so you've been in prison, not jail, you've been in prison. So if you get a sentence for a year or longer, that's a prison sentence. If you get a sentence under a year, you would spend it in jail. So after you get out of prison, your transition time back into society, that's called parole. And so sometimes people get that mixed up, but we'll move on.
Good clarification.
Good.
There we go. All right, so after sentencing comes correctional institutions,
In third, when you can go to a jail, a prison system, again, for a number of different years possibly, or months, or you could maybe just go into, as they put up on your slide, a treatment program would be another option that people may be going into. I know our society, we have a number of different opportunities in a sense to try to, again, rehabilitate a person. The goal, and I talked about this the whole time, the goal is to try to correct the behavior, to make a change. And I still believe that's what our system is for. It's not perfect. I know there's people that have ideas on both sides about our prison system, about punishing people, to make them feel bad, to lock them up, which that might be the case for some people, but there are other people that have made mistakes, and maybe it's an opportunity to give them a second chance, so to speak.
Oh, and there's parole. Sorry, I jumped the gun.
That's all right. But yeah, and there's a lot of different things that can be done during parole, and one of those things in prison that, if people can educate themselves to all the opportunities through the parole system, they have such a better chance. But so many people, the curse happens that they fall, inmates fall back into their habits that got them into prison quickly. And so, and I'm an advocate for the parole system and stuff. And my mentor growing up developed a program called Amicus, which was a program that helped this transition and got information to people on parole and worked with them to re-educate them and reintegrate them into society. And the system has now gone nationwide, and it's a nice feather in his hat. But it took him 18 months in prison to realize, boy, there needs to be this transition program and whatnot. Yeah, Mr. Herman, he was. There you go. Okay, so proposals for fighting crime. How do we prevent crime? Like we said, we have less crime, we have a speedier trial system, and we feel better. All right.
And a stronger economy, crime tends to drop. So, like right now, our world is a little bit crazy. And it would not be surprising if down the road, and it takes a while to gather the information, but that we would see a spike in crime during this period.
Right, I think in definitely higher density population areas, right, how many people are getting arrested for stealing toilet paper?
And pretty soon for selling it for $90.
Right.
Right.
But if citizens work together with the police, they can quickly reduce crime in their areas. Going back to that idea of visible deterrent, if people know, in a sense, that they're fairly going to be watched. I'm not talking about cameras in everybody's homes and all that kind of thing, making a police state, but that there are people that are watching out for each other, that helps a lot, I live next to Ms. Holmberg, and her and I are always well aware of, when each of us are in town or out of town, and, we watch each other's houses and stuff. It's just, and I love having that neighborly interaction because I know my house is getting watched over, I don't have to worry about things while I'm away, I'm not surprised when I get back. So there's a lot of ease of thought in neighborhood watch and working with people around you.
Right. In our neighborhood, some of us we've given each other keys to our homes so that when we're out of town, we can just go check, make sure there's a water in the basement or
Right.
those kind of things. So.
Oh, I'll tell you a little story. I mean, and I know most of you know that I like to tell stories, but those of you that don't probably know, my brother is a administrator of a prison system in Escambia County, which is in Florida, and he's in charge of thousands of prisoners. It's a county prison. It's not a federal prison, so he's going to see people that are coming in serving 5, 6, 7, 8 months or 9 months, let's say, in the prison system. One of his biggest challenges right now is that he's seeing people that are coming in with the COVID-19, and he's in charge of the medical doctors and the nurses and stuff of this hospital that they actually have inside the jail itself. And it's just amazing to hear the stories that he says of things that go on in that jail and the challenges and stuff, especially right now with the virus that's going around. So it's pretty amazing.
Awesome.
All right. Now,
Being tougher on criminals, mandatory sentences and capital punishment. Capital punishment is the death penalty. Usually have a lot of discussions about the death penalty of whether or not that's an effective means for stopping or eliminating crime. And, most of the research shows that the death penalty actually doesn't stop crime from being committed. If a person is going to go out and kill somebody, what they talk about, at least for the people, they don't really think about that I'm going to die. It costs a lot of money. I know a lot of studies have been done on the death penalty. Some of these studies have indicated that it's more expensive to actually put a person on death row, so to speak, and execute that person than what it actually is to keep them life in prison. Some states do have the death penalty. Minnesota does not. I know there are probably some people, and maybe you could talk to your parents. This would be a great discussion that you could have with your parents or grandparents and stuff about what their feelings are on capital punishment.
I think Colorado just abolished their death penalty yesterday.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I thought I read that or whatnot. So, right, I was, at a younger age, I was in favor of the death penalty and that these people don't have the right to. And then, as I've gotten older and I've realized the actual cost of the death penalty, I'm much more of a fiscal conservative type of guy, that it costs way too much money to have somebody on death row, and just because of the appeal process and the incarceration in a special situation and whatnot, that to our society, it's easy to say, oh, that guy killed babies, he needs to die. Absolutely. But the due process and everything, it takes so long that I'm saying, well, not really. It's a pragmatism in me. It's not
Like I said, a good discussion you can have at home. If you're sitting around right now, you've got obviously more time on your hands just to talk to people and get some thoughts and ideas about, what you think. I mean, like I've always said, I'm not here to tell you how you're supposed to think. You need to find out the reasons of why you believe the things that you believe in.
And if you have family discussions on these things and there's a question that comes up in the discussion, shoot us that, let's, keep this education process rolling, send us an email or whatnot.
But one of the things about the death penalty, and then we're gonna be quiet here in a moment, is that, there's different, opinions about if you are on the jury and have to assign the death penalty. There are people who struggle with depression and other mental health issues because they had to take someone's life. And, I've listened to multiple interviews from people who have had to make that decision, and from one particular jury pool that made the decision for one person, out of the 12 people who did it, some of them struggled with deep, dark depression because of the situation, and others were like, fine. And so it's something to think about. That's all.
Just one other thought, I know this comes up to, it's like, there are people that are sitting on death row that actually have been found innocent. I mean, our system of deciding if somebody is guilty isn't necessarily 100% accurate. And we're finding cases, things that are currently going on. I know there's a case in Texas, I think it was on 60 Minutes, of a person he committed a crime, I think it was back in like 1983, and he's been sitting there, for having this alleged crime, and, they're still looking at the evidence or trying to gather evidence. And most people feel that, unfortunately, maybe our judicial or our legal system may not have been always fair, may not have been always just in collecting information, and this person was found guilty and maybe never ever committed the crime, and has spent 30, close to 40 years in jail. If you take somebody's life and later on you find out that they didn't necessarily do that, it's kind of, you kind of get this empty feeling, I suppose, in your heart that you sentenced somebody to die and they didn't do it.
And now, we're not gonna talk about this, but check out Elizabeth Loftus and her eyewitness studies. Just look.
Want to repeat that again?
Elizabeth Loftus. She did research on memory, and there's a bunch of information out there, and there's some cool videos and that kind of thing. So, if you're just hanging out trying to bide your time with something interesting, look up eyewitness testimony, and the researcher is Elizabeth Loftus. She did TED Talks and everything. So there's plenty out there, and it's fascinating.
Okay, should we move on?
Well, I think we touched a little bit already on mandatory sentences and whatnot, but that concept of 3 strikes or you're out kind of thing, I think keep in mind too, that you'll hear that come up in some states.
California specifically.
California has found, again, this is me looking at the dollars, that it's just not a sustainable type of due process of law. And then an author I like, Malcolm Gladwell, did a research grab and found that in most cases, the 30-year-old version of somebody who committed a crime when they were 20 would never have committed that crime to begin with. They just kind of grow out of the angst that create crime and whatnot. So it's both the studies that he looked at are generating those legal discussions and how to manage and maintain criminals in our system. Okay. All right, last page. Oh no, rehabilitation. Right.
They've kind of touched on this a number of different times throughout our discussion, but the whole system is trying to teach inmates again to live productive lives, when they're released. That's the goal.
Right. Yep. And it always will come down to making that right choice. And there are opportunities to make that right choice in any state of incarceration. You just have to be willing to develop the change. And now for the last slide. One more graphic organizer. This is a good summary of what we've just said on this video.
So thanks for listening, you guys.
Like I said, we've touched on a lot of different points and stuff. If you have any questions at all, drop us an email and we'll get back to you on it. And if we can't get you back, give an answer right away. We'll see if we can't find a person, obviously, that is more diverse in a sense of knowing what's going on in this. So, thanks a lot. Appreciate you listening to us.
See you on the internet.
All right.